This happened when I was 18, making the street trip from my hometown to my unused college. I had all my stuff pushed into the trunk and rearward sitting arrangement of my cheap SUV. This was not as it were mine to begin with long street trip alone, but was moreover aiming to be mine to begin with time being absent from my family for an expanded sum of time, so my nerves were sensibly tall. Besides, the headings I was taking said it was 600 m, add up to which I part into 2 days of driving. I was taking anything course the maps had me take, and it assessed I'd make it to the lodging at 11:00 p.m. but with conceivable activity gas stops, and getting nourishment, I knew I'd likely get there much afterward. By 7, the sun was completely gone, and most of the cars were gone as well. Each once in a whereas a car would pass by, and I'd see their headlights gradually blur out before me, but for most of the drive, it was fair me. This really made me truly tired and bored. Around 10, I chosen I'd halt at the following gas station sometime recently, making the ultimate extend of the drive. Around 10 minutes afterward, I left the street and entered a gas station. Being so distant out, this wasn't a town or anything. It was actually a fair gas station with some pumps and a minor comfort store. I didn't see any other cars on the street or within the part, and not indeed any lights from any adjacent houses or buildings within the separate. I pulled right up to a pump and got out to begin topping off my tank, and as I looked around, I nearly got hop frightened by a fellow strolling up to me. In comparison to myself, he was much more seasoned, likely in his 50s on the off chance that I had to figure, and he truly looked destitute. But in any case, being drawn nearer out here wasn't something I was anticipating, and his brief smile didn't make me feel any more comfortable. "Hi, do you would like something?" I said, trusting he wouldn't walk any closer. The man ceased a number of feet from my car and looked around, nearly cautiously, sometime recently reacting, "Take the exit back onto the interstate." I looked at him befuddled, not beyond any doubt on the off chance that I was understanding him right. He pointed behind me at the exit I came from and rehashed himself. "Take the exit back onto the interstate." After a moment, I said, "Affirm," and the man strolled off. But I was still truly confused. The exit I came from that he needed me to require once more was a one-way street. So by his rationale, he needed me to drive on the off-base side of the street and do a U-turn back onto the thruway. It fair didn't make any sense. I looked out at the entrance street, the self-evident one that I was assumed to require, and there were no signs of any development or anything blocking it. It fair looked like an purge inclined back onto the interstate. As I put the pump back and got in my car, I looked over at the man who was now fair sitting against the side of the comfort store. The more I thought about it, in spite of the fact that the more insane that man appeared fair to be sitting out here saying drivel. I thought perhaps this was a few kind of trap or something, so I went with my intuitive and drove out of the part and toward the entrance to the thruway. As I blended onto it, in spite of the fact that I realized beautiful much all the road lights were out, I moderated down, considering possibly this was a construction zone or something. I kept my eyes centered on the street straightforwardly ahead, making sure to be cautious of anything. But whereas I made my way through the dim street, I saw as it were a brief layout of a figure to my cleared out some time recently. A pickup truck came out of no place and ceased right before my car. Each door opened as 4 men bounced out of the truck and begun running up to my car, holding weapons of all kinds, metal bats, cleavers, blades, and not indeed anything covering their faces. They fair had this emotionless look, like they felt nothing of what they were doing. I rapidly began backing up as they got fair some feet absent from my windows, and once I got distance sufficient back, I all of a sudden saw the layout of handfuls of individuals coming out of the shadows off the side of the street. Some indeed attempted chasing my car as I quickly switched out of theirs before long as I seen. I turned around and sped off. I called 911 once I felt I was secure, but for a few reasons, I never got a call back, no overhaul on it at all, merely like they didn't indeed check on it. Ironically, in spite of the fact that it was the frightening ancient fellow at the gas station that attempted to avoid me from indeed getting caught up in that mess. Or at slightest, that was what I accept he was doing. Either way, I was incredibly fortunate to induce out of that with my life, as I have no thought what that was or what they were all arranging to do. It was an ordinary Friday after my college classes were out, and I was investing the night doing DoorDash. This was my normal routine, dashing on the ends of the week to assist me pay for all my living costs, whereas on campus. The night begun well, getting a lot of orders done, and making a great sum. And after that it hit a stalemate after the enormous supper surge. Exceptionally few orders were appearing up, and the ones that did, they were exceptionally paying. Essentially squander of time orders. But at that point, after an hour of erratically driving around, an arrange came through that wasn't as well terrible. It was 8 miles absent, but the payment was well worth it. It was nothing ridiculous, but sufficient to create it not a sham like a parcel of the other ones were. Accepted the arrange and ran into the eatery to seize the pack. At that point jumped in my car and begun driving. The map said it would take 30 minutes, which I think was the longest of any orders I'd done up until this point. Most of the houses were right around campus, since any encouraged than 15 to 20 minutes out. It gets to be pretty much fair uncovered areas of grass. As I need to that 20-minute mark, it got to be just that. Very few houses, for the most part sitting distant out in fields of crops and nothing else. The rest of the 10-minute drive was on this perch street going along these ranches. Then I made it to the house. There was an earth carport interfacing to the street, driving through an expansive field, and within the distant back was a little house. Driving through the field felt exceptionally spooky, indeed, though I'm not one to urge apprehensive without reason. This felt different. As I got further out from the street, the as it was sound was the low rumbling of my car on the soil. I stopped out front to get the bag ready, at that point left the car on as I ventured out. The night was calm, and the house was dark, having as it were the yard light on to light the exterior. I strolled through the unkempt grass and up to the porch, thumping on the entryway. As I held up, I looked back at my car sitting within the dark, with a field of pitch dark behind it. A moment went by. At that point I knocked again, but there was no reaction, not even the sound of anyone interior. It didn't take long for me to realize the strangeness of the circumstance, seeing no lights on within the windows and taking note how decayed the house looked up near. The as it were thing that made me think it couldn't be surrendered was that I had an arrange for this address and the porch light was on. I looked at the light, considering why would that be the as it were light. But by some odd chance, I happened to recognize the best parcel of the casing having a cheap solar battery. It was just an programmed light that charges amid the day and turns on in the evening, meaning no one had to be here to turn it on. Fair as I was piecing this all together, in spite of the fact that I listened to thundering sound behind me. I turned, seeing a car driving down the dirt path and coming up right behind my car. I stood there and gazed at their headlights until a man ventured out. I yelled from the yard, inquiring on the off chance that this was his arrange, but he didn't answer. He fair stood right following to his car and didn't move or talk. I felt my adrenaline spike as I began realizing how appalling this situation likely was. The silence of the night only reminded me that there was no one here to help. I was stuck in the middle of a field between an purge house and a stranger. In a split second found response. I dropped the bag and sprinted off the patio, running behind the house and straight into the field of grass. I looked back, seeing the man coming up behind me quickly. I proceeded running, and the encourage out I got, the thicker and taller the grass got to be until it was covering all seas of direction. By at that point, I knew the fellow had no chance in taking after me. I slowed down, catching my breath as I carefully moved through the crops, and attempted to be calm in case the man was still attempting to find me. In the long run, I made it to somebody else's yard, and from there, I owed to a street where I had sufficient flag to call for offer assistance. Police picked me up and went to check on my car, but of course, none was gone by then. I was astounded in spite of the fact that since my car hadn't been plundered, and the pack of nourishment was still on the patio of the deserted house. But that might as it were cruel that the man had other eagerly, likely distant, more regrettable than fair victimizing me. I was conveying a truckload to a company on the distant west coast, coming from the east coast. The course over the nation is one I've taken numerous times sometime recently, being a truck driver for nearly 20 a long time. It's continuously the same each time I make one of these drives. Same streets, same truck stops, and same everything. Over these 20 a long time, in spite of the fact that I've never truly had anything insane happen. I've had many odd scenarios, but they've never measured to anything. So when I was driving this course once more, I had no stresses in my intellect. It was fair another day on the work. Around 20 hours into the course, a storm began coming over and abating down my driving. It was late too, so by at that point, I was as of now searching for the following truck halt to rest at. As I drove, in spite of the fact that a really sudden light showed up behind me. The street I was on was level and straight, so I would have seen them coming in my reflect. But it was all of a sudden that they were right behind me. Possibly they had turned on their lights or something. I didn't know. But they exceptionally rapidly came right up to the back. I kept my eyes on them until they got so near that they were totally secured by the trailer. All I seemed to see were their headlights reflecting off the back, but at that point their lights closed off. I kept up my speed and kept looking back at my mirrors, attempting to see in the event that they were still behind me, but I had no way to know. For somebody to turn off their lights within the center of an overwhelming storm was crazy, in spite of the fact that, and to be following behind me so near was fair as crazy. Gratefully, a sign appeared. A truck halt was as it were 5 miles ahead, so at slightest I knew I was near to getting absent from anything this was. I didn't want to bounce to conclusions based on few peculiar behavior, but as a trucker, it's difficult not to think around the plausibility of it being an endeavored burglary, particularly when alone on the street at night. For the rest of the 5 miles, I saw no signs of them behind me. I was still on edge since I couldn't truly see anything besides, but I began feeling less stressed as I was coming in on the truck halt. I pulled in, attempting to check my mirrors to see in case they'd taken after, but with the rain and need of lighting, it was truly as well difficult to tell. The truck halt was generally empty though, aside from a couple of trucks at the gas pumps. I pulled off to the side and parked within the center of the parcel. After holding up a diminutive and getting a few of my stuff organized, I opened the truck entryway and inclined my head out, looking along the side of the trailer. I was soaked from the rain in just a matter of seconds, but from what I might tell, there was no car behind me. I closed the entryway and at last felt a bit of help, getting my pad and cover from the traveler side. I bolted the entryways, turned off the truck, and attempted to urge a few shut-eye. The rain beating on the metal roof made it simple to drop sleeping, blocking out any conceivable sounds coming from other trucks pulling in and out. When I woke up, in spite of the fact that I felt I had only been snoozing for some minutes, I looked around, seeing it was still dull out, and the storm was the same, on the off chance that not more regrettable. But sometime recently I seen check my mirrors. A uproarious pound shook the truck. My eyes opened wider. I come to for the entryway handle and opened it, looking out at the back of the trailer through the rain. I could scarcely see the layout of a car with its headlights off and 2 men moving around before it. Panicked, I wavered to step out and go up against them. And as I sat there in that minute of faltering, the entryway all of a sudden slammed against my body, pushing me back in courage into the driver's situate. Another man stood exterior, hollering at me to remain where I was at that point, hammering the entryway once more. His right hand was pushed in his hoodie, and with two other men behind the truck. I was in no position to undertake anything. I may feel the truck shake as I fair sat and put, with a fellow exterior my entryway observing my each move. He didn't indeed see absent for a second. This went on for a few minutes. At that point they ran back to their car and drove off. I was still in stun, observing their car vanish onto the street. I called the police and put in a report, but no data ever came up on who the men were. All I know is that in case I had been any less mindful and had fair attempted to drive off at to begin with locate of the men, I likely wouldn't have been able to form it out as securely as I did. Great.